Hey everybody, I'm going to take some time here to cover the last bit of material that I wanted to touch on about this channel specifically. This is going to follow from my first 3 intro videos, Why Do We Watch Movies, Why Do We Argue About Movies, and Who Am I? And it's going to be, why did I start this channel? And I know this is not necessarily a particularly viral topic or anything, but I do think there are a lot of things about YouTube and movie and book theories that I want to say that I think people might actually find interesting. And also, it's going to lead into my more significant videos, and I have a big one planned next, right after this one. So it'll give me a sense of completeness and provide the right context. Anyway, to me, starting this channel was a big decision and was not anything particularly natural to me. I'm not, or I wasn't, a vlogger or a commentator or anything like that to where I wanted to engage people this way. But by trade, I was a writer for a really long time, and I still am. So doing this was pretty major for me. I had done some editing and voice work in college and a bit professionally, but really I had to learn to edit videos, develop a visual style that worked in a lot of ways, and specifically work on and change the way I spoke and presented myself. There's actually a quote that says that there's a difference between wanting to do something and wanting to do something so much that you're willing to change to do it. So the question then is why? What specific aspect of myself or my situation or what I saw made me do that? Well, to me, like I talked about in the other videos, I spent a long time studying specifically what makes movies and books successful. You know, it was a major topic for me. It's complex, you can learn something new every day, you can apply yourself to it, and you learn about entertainment and about people themselves. So it's a natural thing to get into. But the whole time I did it, I actually did not study an entirely different aspect of the issue, which is what makes a person successful in movies or publishing. You know, those actually are not the same categories, and it might even have taken me some time to figure that out. Initially, you might assume that the whole thing is pure meritocracy because if you don't have any background in the field, you can see movies getting made and they really do seem to succeed based on how good they are. The best movies and books tend to gross a crap load of money, and I found that that's true. A lot of what makes something successful does come from how well it works for the audience. And if you take writing classes or filmmaking classes, they generally tend to be focused precisely on that, doing good work. I'd also come across a few sites, like one specifically when I was a teenager called WordPlayer, which really sparked my interest in writing because it approached everything logically, which I didn't really realize you could do. And that site recommends specifically that the quality of someone's writing is the core of their success. There's even an anecdote on the site that says the key to success as a screenwriter is to write a great script and then bury it in your basement, and agents and filmmaking people will find you. So I guess I had bought into that. However, there's an alternate perspective, and this is the one that you hear from people who have worked a little bit in movie production or writing or publishing, which is the cynical point of view, which is that great authors or filmmakers tend to actually get ignored, and a lot of bad work is what actually gets made. This is also generally what you hear from a lot of people who are film buffs. It's a bit of a contrarian position, you know, the traditional idea is this, so I'm going to just go against it to feel original. But it has its evidence, especially in writing, where there are a ton of talented writers who didn't really achieve their fame until after they died, and I found out later a lot of reasons for that. But there are some very clear ones that even then I didn't know. You know, the whole time that I was looking at what works specifically to make a good screenplay or movie, even while I was working at places and interning at places, being a normal employee, I wasn't paying much attention to the other factors that make someone successful. Things that a lot of people know, like the way personal relationships work, connections, and so on. I did a good job and whatnot, but I never really focused on it because you can't see those things in an actual published work. So it naturally never found its way into my research. And that's actually a major part of the issue. There's 2 tiers to these businesses that often don't interact. The things that get someone selected to make a movie, write a movie, or have a script produced or get a novel out and so on, often are not the things that make someone successful once their work is actually released. For example, there are directors who are known to, quote, give good meeting in Hollywood, meaning that they're funny or charismatic or likable. But that personal charisma and likability isn't on the screen when the movie is released. The same is true for personal relationships between decision makers and the people chosen. So a large portion of the way things actually work is and was cut off from what I was studying and a lot of the things we talk about in terms of what makes good writing or filmmaking. Now, this is of course not surprising. I don't think I'm saying anything that most people who are movie fans don't already get. There are aspects of it that I think are far less known that we're going to be talking about. But anyway, I love writing stories and so on, and when I was doing all this, I was initially having a hard time figuring out how to become a professional writer, even if I liked it more and studied it more than other people. And I found out later that there's a key factor there that makes the difference for people who work on their actual craft in order to be successful professionals, which is specifically that the quality of your work matters, and matters a lot. And people who study and become really good at what they do have a tendency to succeed once their work is distributed. Very quick example, The Great Gatsby. The author F. Scott Fitzgerald said himself that he felt a special power in his words while he was writing it. But the book was not commercially successful until almost 20 years after it was published, when it was given out en masse to soldiers serving overseas in World War II, so they'd have something to read. That's when people realized the book was very good. There's a lot of reasons for that, but for now, the key idea was that exposure really is a key part. If you believe you're good at what you do, you need to get that thing out to an audience for it to be appreciated. But in the way publishing and movie production works, in both cases, getting distributed means you have to get permission or to be accepted, which means you need to be seen and considered by the people who do the accepting. Now, this is of course true in a ton of other fields, like in music and art also. To be a successful musician, it helps to have a recording contract. Artists need to be exhibited, and so on. But there's a fundamental difference between those and screenwriting and publishing, and it's something I call the effort ratio of the product. The effort ratio of something is how much effort someone has to put out to receive the actual value or see the potential value of whatever it is you're offering. For example, a beautiful person can get a lot of offers to do things, particularly in acting or modeling, because it requires essentially zero effort for someone to see how good looking they are, and appreciate their looks as well as easily see that others could appreciate it. So, if you are extremely good looking, it's not difficult at all to become a model. You can be considered hundreds or even thousands of times a day very easily. Just walk into a studio, walk past a decision maker, or send people your picture. Likewise, in music and art, the effort ratio for your audience is very low. Not as low as with good looks, but still low. It just takes a glance to see a painting or sculpture and get the gist of what it's about and how good you think it is. You need only to put your painting up on the side of the street and hundreds or thousands of people will see it in a day if you do it in the city. As such, I haven't heard much about models begging to be considered or painters struggling to get seen. Moving on from that, a song takes a few minutes to listen to and requires the listener to basically stop a lot of what they're doing. So it takes a few minutes of commitment, but people can then know if they think the song is any good. However, those few required minutes are effort on the part of the listener, which may result in nothing if the music isn't any good, and likewise may even be a negative experience for the person considering it, since he or she has to tell you that they don't like it. A model or painter needs only to hear from the people who like the way they look, and not the people who aren't interested. Thus, musicians have to struggle more to get considered. Those few committed minutes and the bit of awkwardness is the reason why music producers are known to complain about constantly being handed demo tapes by people. Now, that is a bit up the scale of effort ratio, but when we get closer to our field, we make a giant leap to the other end. Forget a few minutes of attention. If you want someone to consider a movie you made, that's a few hours. That's a significant commitment of time. So filmmakers have it even tougher to get considered. But filmmakers do have the ability to have their film seen by large numbers of people at once. So logically, you would see events like that organized, where people consider movies, and it works even better if you eliminate the awkwardness of someone having to personally say they don't like the film. Do both, and you have what we call the film festival. That's exactly the purpose that film festivals like Cannes serve. And those mass exhibitions where hundreds of film executives and buyers see prospective movies is how new filmmakers get noticed. You do need to organize and stage the festival, of course, as well as bring in the executives and so on, but it still provides an avenue for those filmmakers. However, there is a level of effort ratio beyond that, which is when you have written a book or a screenplay. Reading a book or a screenplay takes not only several hours or many hours, you have to actually read it. Your eyes are committed the whole time, and you have to pay attention so you can properly picture what's going on. You don't have the visual doing it for you. On top of that, there's no barrier to entry for writers. It's good that anyone can write a book or script, but that also means anyone can have a script and want an executive or producer or agent to read it. And without that barrier, the likelihood of it being good goes down. Thus, you can't get a bunch of decision makers to look at a book or screenplay on its own. So you have to use other connections to get over the hump of that massive effort ratio. And when you do get it read, there's no anonymous non-consideration. They have to tell the writer personally if they don't like it. So it turns out that writers are in a really bad situation when it comes to getting considered, no matter how good they may or may not be. And of course, if you're a writer, you know this already. As a result, every bit of writing instruction or advice to writers is adjusted to this. And the traditional advice to overcome this is to go with sheer brute force. Simply submit until someone requests the manuscript. I've heard that it's recommended in some classes that writers should paper their walls with rejection letters. And it makes sense, it's good advice. But the numbers game remains insane because as much fight as it is to just be read, you need a certain amount of reads to get someone to actually like the work and want to do something with it. So it becomes a sort of exponential problem. Once a writer's represented, it's a different story and they can get numbers. But before you do, it's known as a classic catch-22. Pre-acceptance somewhere is needed for numbers, and numbers are needed to be accepted. So you can take this as a years-long project and pursue it for years, but as far as I could see beyond that, I never found any other solution. Now, this is where the internet comes in. The traditional problem for anyone who produced media previously was always the need for distribution, getting the work exposed to an audience, so you can capitalize on the actual quality of what you made. But for that, you needed a deal, some type of exhibition or distributor. In 2005, though, these video sites showed up on the internet, and they have open access. All of a sudden, everything we're talking about is different. The issue of disseminating your work becomes far less of a problem, and if you can use the internet, the actual quality of it starts to matter. In other words, we take a giant step towards what I dreamed about and what I think a lot of other people did too, a creative meritocracy, where you rise based on your ability and not those other earlier factors. For musicians, for artists, for singers, for models, the game changed immediately. And that's what we see happening with social media and YouTube. Rejoice, right? It's fantastic. Well, yes, but there's just one problem. The effort ratio. I, and I'm sure a lot of other writers who were thinking about these things, had to confront the fact that I'd spent 10 years of my life getting really, really good at the one thing you couldn't put on YouTube. I even wrote that in my notes, and believe me, that realization did not feel good. There really was no way I was ever going to have the time, the passion, or the ability for anything else that I did for writing and movies and books and comics and learning about them. So, you do some soul searching, you go through what you know, and I knew that it was about having something of value to offer people that had that low effort required. And fast forward a bit, you try things, you consider yourself and your skill set, and you think about it. And it eventually struck me that I did in fact have something shorter of some value that might be unique and that people might find interesting. My ideas about writing, which branched out into all these other areas. On top of that, I realized that there might be some real value to presenting a different approach to things, or at least the approach that I had worked on. Because in my experience, there's a huge gap when it comes to theories about our books and movies. There's been a lot of literature and study devoted to it, and people talk about it all the time. But whenever I joined those conversations or read or looked at any of it, I always felt unsatisfied. The same is true when I watch a lot of movie channels on YouTube. And I eventually figured out that pretty much all of the theories had the same problem. Every example they used or what they described wasn't something that caused the movie to be good or bad. Like, for example, someone reviewing Pirates of the Caribbean might say, well, it's Johnny Depp doing his thing, of course it's going to be great. But Johnny Depp also did his thing in The Lone Ranger, which didn't do well. And I think our minds subconsciously pick up on this. Our brains recognize when what's being said isn't actually logical. So all discussion of movies, even though we want to understand what's going on, end up with this sort of airy, almost empty type of feeling. And not just in reviews. I saw a video on here talking about how to win an Oscar, and to paraphrase, they would list things like, be old, because a higher percentage of older actors won the award. But there's plenty of times a very young actor has won the award. That type of talk or theorizing does nothing to explain what's going on, and I think we can tell that subconsciously. So, I came to call these descriptive theories. They simply describe some aspect of something that happened, implying that that aspect caused the result, without demonstrating how or why it did. And kind of like Occam's razor, there's a sort of razor you can use to recognize these, where you just ask yourself if the thing the person is describing can also be found in a bad movie, or a good movie if they're saying that thing made the movie bad. This is a brutal measure, and when you use it, it really exposes how not good so many of these ideas are. So, on the contrary, everything I tried to find and work out was predictive. I tried to figure out what was really going on so I could develop ideas like the fundamental purpose of storytelling, and then be able to say things that actually would and do contribute to a movie or book success. And with that in mind, I felt like I had something that was really worth sharing with people. And as I've worked my way through this stuff, that basic approach has led me to some other insights, which I feel like I really want to share. You know, anything you have in life you'll get bored of having because your brain will adjust to having it, unless you share it with others, which kind of resets your standards. So all of that is what I can accomplish here. It allows me a way to use my work in that sense where the actual value of it overcomes a lot of those barriers that were outside my understanding, and help myself through helping other people. So that's what we're doing here, really, and this channel covers a lot of areas, but to be clear, it's all things that I specifically wanted to share with people because I wasn't seeing them anywhere else. So I think in some small way, it really is important. That's why I taught myself to edit these videos and worked on my voice and all those other things. And hopefully people find it interesting and exciting, because I'm definitely excited, and I have some really exciting stuff to be working on now that this one's done. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned.